It's time to feel what you've been bottling up. Life in rural America isn't easy. The long hours, the constant pressures, the demands of the land, livestock, and family, it all takes a toll. We're tough and we've got grit, but somewhere along the way, toughness started meaning bottling up emotions and powering through. But here's the truth. That strategy, it's not working and it's poisoning us. Maybe you've noticed and maybe you haven't, but the numbers don't lie. We're breaking down and it's showing up in our bodies, our relationships, and in the rising suicide rates in agriculture. You don't have to carry any of it alone. There's another way. If you're ready to stop being weighed down and start moving forward, my one-on-one good movement guidance is now open. Visit the link in the show notes to learn more and see if one-on-one guidance could be for you.
I'll carry you, you carry me, we'll help each other through it. Come on and say good movement draws good movement.
Welcome to Good Movement Draws Good Movement, the podcast where farmers, ranchers, and rural folks can grow relationally through awareness, understanding, and effective communication. Hey, it's T. I'm your host, and I, along with my guests, will be covering topics related to drawing good movement. Things like self and social awareness, brain science, positive psychology, extending grace, and so much more. We'll share tools that can help you understand why you are the way you are, why others are the way they are, and how you can use that to step out of self-told lies with grace and compassion to draw good movement in conversations, relationships, and life in rural America. Let's go draw good movement. Welcome back to the Good Movement Draws Good Movement podcast. Today, I am so excited because we have my bestie as a guestie.
Yay.
Sheila Hansen is her name, and she is a CPA, a certified public accountant, and she has her own firm based in Nebraska, and she's had that firm for the past 7 years. Sheila lives on 5 acres with her 3 kids. It says a horse, honey, but you have 2 horses right now?
Well, one is a boarded horse, so it's technically not mine. But yes, there's 2 horses on my property.
And a tortoise.
And a tortoise.
Named Rex, who's very cute. As an Enneagram 4, she has space for emotions and uses that in her accounting business to support female business owners as they become confident financial decision makers. Sheila saw the need for not only the tactical how-to when it comes to business finances and taxes, but also the mindset and understanding the money stories we tell ourselves. In addition to holding a CPA license, Sheila is also a certified life coach. That is the formal intro, but now can you tell us a little bit more about you and how you got to where you are today?
Yeah. So I am, like Taryn said, a CPA. So I work with small business owners, and that really came from in high school. I took an accounting class, loved it, and knew that's what I wanted to go into. I worked my way up at an accounting firm. And at the point that I was pregnant with my oldest kiddo, I started questioning all of the things. And Taryn has been a big part of all of my life transitions. So she was part of that discovery, I guess you could say, of myself. And I really went through kind of that identity crisis in all of the things I thought I was working towards. I had basically achieved. And then it was like, wait, this isn't really what I want. But then if this isn't it, what the heck is it? And so that was that was technically almost 10 years ago that I made that change. And I left the firm that I was at, transitioned, got used to being a mom for a couple of years because that whole switch in identity there takes a bit. And then through another kind of tough situation, I ultimately decided to go out on my own and start a firm because I wanted to do it on my terms. I wanted to decide who I was working with and how I was working with, because I saw the main industry of accounting had some faults to how it was doing it. And so that was, now 7 years ago. And the business has shifted and adapted over time. A lot of that due to discovery of self-awareness that Taryn often talks about. And then what I believe she has me on the podcast for today is to talk about my most recent life transition, which was to transition from a marriage to co-parenting.
Yes, that is what you're on the podcast today to talk about. But before we get into that, I always ask every guest, what did you think good movement meant before you heard my definition of good movement?
I mean, this one's kind of hard because I feel like we talk so often that
it's an unfair question for you.
It's an unfair question because when you were going through the whole coming up with it, so what does this mean? I feel like I was involved in that. So as much as it was in your brain, it was in my brain from the get-go.
You had the insider info.
Yeah, I definitely relate it now to both the livestock definition that you have, but also the good movement of interactions with those around you.
Yeah. It just relates across the board. It doesn't matter what you're talking about, really. Good movement is good movement and can't force it.
Yes. I would say so much I've learned as I became a mom and started parenting. It really changes your interactions with humans.
Yes. Yes. Okay. Now that we've got the intros and the question that I ask all the guests out of the way, now we can get into the meat of the conversation. So you recently have shifted from marriage to co-parenting. And just as much as you were with me, coming up with good movement and all kinds of other things in life, I was with you throughout this process. And something that we talk about on this podcast a lot is communication and how communication can help your relationships. And you were doing all the things communication wise. And I had to laugh a little bit because I had launched the Good Movement Collective and I had your testimonial that communication with my husband has never been better. And then right in the middle of my launch is when you made the decision to switch from marriage to co-parenting. And I was like, uh-oh. But then I was like, but that's not false.
No.
The communication really was the best it's ever been between the two of you. But ultimately, you still made the decision to part. So can you talk to us a little bit about that process of when you knew that even though you guys were communicating more efficiently and more clearly than ever, it ultimately at the end of the day was not enough. And when you decided to set that boundary.
Yeah. So this has probably been heavily 18 months, if not longer, but my work that I've been doing has been at least 18 months. And that transition really started with the whole self-awareness of digging into and starting to understand what it was that I desired, what it was I actually wanted, what I was feeling. And it came down to I had needs that weren't being met, but prior version of me didn't know how to communicate that. So that has really been the transition that happened for the last 18, 12 months was I learned and got the tools to understand that about myself and then come to our relationship to be able to communicate those in a much more effective way with both taking into account myself and taking into account to my former spouse and how he receives information and can process and all of that. And so it began with communicating what those expectations were. But then ultimately the decision came down to I was communicating the needs and what I needed and the support that I desired. And yet there was still inability or the way that he was showing up in the marriage was not what I needed and wanted. So because of that is how we came to the decision or decided divorce was the answer. But honestly, because we've done all that, because we're communicating better, this transition has been so much more smooth. Like all of the people that have helped us out with the legal process, with everything, they're like, but you understand this is not normal. We don't normally have it go this smoothly. We don't have to put in, these types of clauses or whatever because the people are not communicating effectively. So it really has now set us up because we've addressed that communication that we can transition it. And now it's focused on what's best for the kids rather than him or I. And yeah, really has set us up for what we think is a positive potential for the future of what our family definition looks like.
Right. So when we talk about boundaries are just, it's an invisible line, or like I use the analogy of a fence of what you're willing to accept or let in or not. And so you ultimately drew that line, like, this is not for me anymore. And right after you guys made the decision to go ahead with divorce, you had messaged me and you're like, we had the best conversation that we've had in a really long time. So what do you think, what can you attribute that really good conversation to?
So I think in a lot of ways, what was getting in the way prior to that was ultimately fear of hurting each other, right? So without the proper tools, the default is let's just not even have the conversation because it might be hurtful. Not our intent, but could happen. And so we avoid the conversation and then we know where that all gets us. So what changed was by having made that decision, it almost let us both off the hook of we're not trying to force something that doesn't feel right for us anymore. And it freed us up to have a really vulnerable conversation that eliminated the potential for hurt, I guess you could say. And it was really just a release of all expectations. I think in a lot of ways, those expectations were what was getting in the way of the vulnerable conversation. And that's where my boundaries came in and my own self-healing and learning that I was ultimately in control of my response and my reaction to things. So by freeing him from responsibility of that, he was then able to show a little bit more vulnerable. But it does still go back to, even though our communication was better, that doesn't mean we were meant to be together.
Right. And so I think sometimes, and this is an assumption of mine, when I'm talking about communication is so important for relationships, sometimes I think that when people hear me say that, they might assume that I mean it's going to fix the relationship and make it back to what it was, or make it to something that you hope it will be. And that's not always the case.
Right.
But good communication can make the relationship better or improve the relationship. Like, is it fair to say that your relationship now is better than it has been the past 18 months?
Yes, our relationship is in a better spot now than it was 18 months, 12 months ago, because the focus is on a mutual ground that we can set aside other things, right? The communication has a purpose on what's best for our kids. And all of the other things don't really matter when we're communicating anymore. So because we have those boundaries of these are the things that I talk to him about and these are the things I don't, and I don't have expectations for him to be involved in other decisions I need to make. Now the communication that we have is focused on the right things.
This is a really great real life example of kind of what I touched on a while back. I guess it was episode 36. I just looked it up. Episode 36 on boundaries being kind. Like, you set the boundary that was the kindest thing that you could do for yourself. And because it was the kindest thing that you could do for yourself, it was the kindest thing that you could do for your former spouse, for your kids. And because of that, your relationship is actually, it's different. It's not the same relationship it was, but it's better
Yeah,
than it was.
absolutely. So there have been, in the most specific weeks, there have been a couple times that I have had to set that boundary or communicate. Here's what we've decided. We agreed upon this. This is what happens when you choose a different option. And so I think I don't know, do you talk about Dr. Becky on here?
I have mentioned Dr. Becky.
Okay, she's the one where I've gotten the most help with boundaries, I think, and it's all about what we will do, not expecting the behavior of the other person to change, right? It's if you do this, this is how I'm going to respond, not you need to do this
Right.
certain action. So that is where my communication has also improved in that I can explain that very clearly to him. Like, here's the boundary. If you don't meet that, this is what happens because of it. And then he ultimately gets to choose whether he follows that or doesn't. But then I can enforce the response that I have because of the boundary being broken.
Right. And I think also, too, in our off air conversation, which is daily, and when it's not crazy busy tax season for you or crazy busy calving branding for me, is multiple times daily or frequently daily. You have also alluded to the fact that you not only is the boundary like, if he does this or doesn't do this, this is what I'm going to do, but also you've kind of boundaried yourself where you see something that in the past you would have spoken up about because the relationship was different. And now you see it and you're like, nope, I'm not going to say anything about that.
Yep.
That's not mine to say right now anymore.
Yep. Those are his choices to make. And as long as it doesn't impact our kids, now it's no longer my job to say anything about it.
Yeah. So it's boundaries can kind of work both ways. Like,
frees me of any responsibility for
yep,
saying
they're
something.
always for you as an individual, but it could be when to say something or when not to say something, or when to do something, when not to do something. So it keeps stuff out and it keeps stuff in.
Yes. Very good way to explain that.
Just like a fence.
Yeah.
My fence analogy tracks.
Yeah. And that was in therapy, one of the exercises that she had us do was draw our yard and like what's in our yard, what's not in our yard. And living on an acreage, I have a pasture fence, but I don't have a yard fence because I don't want a yard fence. Like, I don't have anybody coming on my property that I need to keep out. And so it was just really interesting to, try and then relate that back to boundaries.
But I mean, even if you don't have a yard fence, you still sort of have a yard boundary, like where the
I do. I have
lawn...
short yard grass and tall prairie grass. And so there is a natural fence there.
I don't want no thistles in my yard. Okay, so you talked to a little bit about what you just talked about, your therapy, and both of us have been seeing the same person.
Yes, she's amazing.
And it's such hard work. And you know that. I know that. We just discussed like 2 days ago how we don't like brain spotting. Well,
yeah,
how we like it, but we don't like it. But can you speak to, yes, this is very hard, but then also how it benefits? Because I think sometimes, well, I shied away from doing the hard work for a long time. Like, I was cool with the self-awareness and getting to know why I am the way I am. But when it came right down to actually the processing of the emotions and learning how important our emotions are, I was resistant. And I don't think that is unique to me. I think that is pretty common. And so can you speak to, from your own personal experience, how, yes, it is hard, but how it has benefited you long term, long run?
Yeah. So prior to the provider that we use right now, or we both share, I had gone to therapy before, and that was a completely different experience. And I wouldn't say it was beneficial necessarily in the way that processing and kind of really being held accountable to processing the crap. So yeah, what I really had to work through was feeling shame or guilt for having the emotion. And that is absolutely not how you process emotions. It's to feel shame or guilt for having them. It is to honor and accept like what the emotion is telling you, and then to make the choice of what you're going to do going forward, having experienced that emotion. And so oftentimes the trouble for most of us comes from suppressing all of that. And so then when we don't feel it, that's when it bottles up and at some point gets released and explodes. And it's not the way that we want it to. And so that really has been the other part of my 12-month journey, is to understand what it is those emotions are trying to tell me. And it was ultimately telling me, like, I didn't feel safe here. This didn't feel good to me. There was something about the situation that was just off. And so when I started to tune in and be able to feel those, then I could start to process why it was they were showing up. Like, what were my emotions trying to protect me from? And that is then when my communication could get clearer, because I knew the actual thing that was getting triggered or responded, or the response that the emotions were generating. And now, having done that, and like last week, she made me sit with a couple emotions in particular. And I will say, like, I was a person that always wore my emotions on my sleeve, right? Like, you knew, like, I am a 4, so I can go quickly from one to the other, high, low, jump around in a day.
I'm going to interrupt you for just a second. If Sheila doesn't have enough of the high, low emotions, specifically the low, she'll watch a sad show.
Yeah.
Get them.
Yes. Like for me, yeah, the joy isn't as big and fun if you don't experience the sadness as well. So like, I explain it as like the little kid roller coaster, like the hills are only so big because the dips are only so big. But if you go on a big old roller coaster, like because you're going up and down, it makes it more exciting. But you can't go on the really high moments without eventually coming down, right?
It makes sense what you're saying, but also no.
For somebody else. So yeah, legit, like almost every time it used to be when I left Taryn's house, I would cry leaving. This last time I was crying on my way there, like coming down the gravel road. Like I was just so excited. It was like a joyful cry, but nothing was wrong with that. But by feeling the emotion, then I could start to process where it was actually coming from, what it was actually telling me. And that's what led to being able to communicate differently. So now, while I experience emotions, I am allowing the emotion. It's not in control of me like it used to be. And that has been probably so far my biggest benefit of having done this hard work of sitting with the emotion, is when I allow it and understand it, then it doesn't control. And I'm still able to come as a calm, peaceful person to whatever is happening.
You are using your emotions now for their intended purpose, which is to inform you.
Yes. Rather than being the control board.
Yeah.
Of running my life. Yeah.
The other thing that we did that is totally not related to this at all, except for that it brought us a lot of joy and laughter.
Oh, so much joy.
Sheila was being served reels while she was at my house of same arm, same leg running. And she's like, we have to try this. And so we did. And oh my, we even got Tom to try it, but he wouldn't let us record him. But we have video, which I will share again on my Instagram stories. So if you're following on Instagram, you'll have to go see. But we recorded both of us same arm, same leg running. And it's so funny.
Yes. Good endorphin booster. You also thought it was a good ab workout. But yeah, good mental focus.
For sure, like abs and quads, because it's a lot
your leg
harder
is not,
to lift your same arm and same leg together I'm doing the actions right now than it is to run like we were designed to run.
Right. To balance each side with one thing forward on each side. But
yeah, your core has to work really hard to balance.
And you have to give yourself enough distance, right? Like the first couple steps are kind of easy to stay in the rhythm. But if you give yourself enough distance, that's where the transition of you wanting to go back to normal happens. And that's the comical part.
That and the expression your face makes.
Trying to
concentrating.
Yeah, it was good. Definitely give it a try in a group of friends.
10 out of 10 recommend. So recently on the podcast, I have talked about attachment and attunement and how important those things are in our lives, and how, like, I am going out on a limb and I'm going to say attachment and attunement are what humans need most, and also what humans are lacking most.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you felt this when you were here, but I definitely felt it. Like my attunement to you and what you needed while you were here was like, and I don't even think that I realized it until after you left, because I'm slow at that. Like in my work as a type 9, I'm coming out of being comfortably numb. So sometimes it's a delayed reaction, but it definitely was what was happening. But when you were here, I was like, okay, I would get you your coffee in the morning and make you a breakfast. And like, I'd have it ready when you came upstairs, and just like different little things while you were here. And I think that, I don't know that this is a question, but maybe something you can add to. I felt that I was more attuned to you while you were here, having done the work that I've been doing. And so I think what we need most and what we're lacking most, we can gain through this work that you have done, that I am, well, you're still doing, and I'm doing, have done, and am doing.
Yeah. And I would say, so when I was at your house, it didn't feel uncomfortable for me to be on the other side of that, right? Like that is exactly what I needed. I just needed somebody to kind of take care of me. And, because we have that connection of the things I like, the things that bring me joy, the coffee that you make a certain way, being fed, you always consider when I'm coming out what my favorite meals are when you're planning for the time that I'm there. Like those kinds of things you're taking into account. And with me and you, I don't feel that it's hard for me to receive that. However, I just last week went to a retreat that I was around 4 other women that I know from the internet, but have never really been with. And they were all willing to kind of do that for me. And yet it was so hard for me to accept that in that scenario. And it was just my own wall and block that I had put up. And so that was like a new phase of healing that I had to work through. It was like, what the hell? There's 4 women here who have not stated that they don't want to be pouring into me, that they don't care about me, that all of that. I am willing to do the same for them. And yet I was finding myself withdrawing because I didn't want to make it a burden on them. And so that was something I had to really work through. And so that I think goes into the attunement and the attachment of when you maybe haven't had that starting. It's not just like, oh yeah, this feels cozy and comfortable. It's like, wait, what is this?
Yeah. Like when your attachment center is not, when it's got some holes in it and you're trying to repair those holes, and you are repairing those holes or filling those holes, but also it feels kind of not like, it feels
like new or uncomfortable just because it's something you haven't experienced.
Yeah.
Not necessarily because you don't want it or don't like it. It's just like, ooh, this is
right. Like
this is not my cozy chair that I'm used to sitting in.
Or like a new pair of shoes. Like they're totally awesome and they're going to be comfortable. Like my gazelles, my Adidas gazelles that I just got. Like I've had gazelles in the past. I knew that they were going to be comfortable, but they changed the length of the tongue. And it was hard for me to accept.
Yeah. And then you had to figure out which way to wear them to
And
for it
now
to
they're
be most
fine.
comfortable.
They're great.
Yeah.
I love them. I wear them. When I don't wear them, sometimes my feet are like, why don't you have your gazelles on?
Yeah. So I think that doing the hard work, there's definitely benefits, but it also isn't just like the straightforward thing you think
Right.
is going to come out of it.
Right. This is where I'm glad you said that, because I was going to backtrack a little bit when you were talking about doing the work, and it wasn't really until you understood your emotions that you could, like, you were learning to communicate, but the key to unlocking it was understanding your emotions. You shared in your Instagram stories the other day, it was business related and related to what you do with bookkeeping and your clients and their numbers and financials, but you were weeding your flower beds.
Yeah. Oh my goodness.
And the side bed, was it the side bed or the back bed?
Yeah. The sides have gotten a look. The front looks great. The side,
But you're like, I don't even know
where
to start.
Yeah.
But you just, so when you were going through the process of trying to work on your relationship with your former spouse, you didn't really know where to start. So you started with communication. That was your kind of your starting point. And then as you got more comfortable with that, you're like, okay, but there's still some more weeds here that need to go. So then you moved into your work with our therapy provider.
Yeah. So it actually started that I could recognize I was in survival mode, but I didn't know why I was there. And so that was the very first work that I started. It was like, I have no energy. I'm constantly struggling to just get through the day and like make any progress anywhere. Why is this? And so that's where it started. And then from there, it became, communicating my needs and understanding my needs and then communicating them. And then that really dug into those wounds that we have. And that was where like that deep healing of going back to, oftentimes my brain spotting sessions are on childhood related things. I fell into the category of my childhood was fine. Like it was good. I didn't have what I referred to as trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And yet there were things or points where my needs weren't met in the way that I needed and wanted them to be. And so I needed to work through and heal and understand those to truly then understand that my needs now aren't too much, that people are able to meet them if I'm communicating them. And that again leads into the divorce decision came from I was communicating them and I had them, and yet he was not able to meet them in the way that I was wanting and needing them. So yeah, it was digging into kind of that, what I would for like more traditional type therapy of going back to your childhood and addressing where those foundational level of some of the things came from. And then now I'm able to process that and just like recognize it. And so now it's like, oh, hey, that's you showing up. Like, nice to see you, but no thanks.
It's kind of like this whole healing journey. It reminds me of, not that I've ever had a wound debrided, but where they have to like scrape back the grossness,
go deeper
to get it to heal correctly, properly, stronger.
That's exactly what this is.
That's what it reminds me of, because you have to peel back a lot of layers to get down to the healthy tissue. Oh, you just sent me a reel on Instagram, actually, that was talking about what you thought was your personality is actually trauma. And it's true. Like, personality is not who we are. It's what we put on to protect ourselves.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
And we spend our whole lives putting it on. So when you become aware,
take it back off or rewire and come up with new skills on how you're going to handle a situation that's not your default because of.
Right. On a couple of other episodes, I don't know if I've ever said this analogy specifically on this podcast, but on a couple of other podcasts I've been on, I say, like, we spend our whole lives putting on personality and we have to peel back the layers, kind of like an onion, to get to us. And I don't know if you have the same trouble that I do, but that first layer of the onion that's like hard and papery is the hardest to peel back. If you're going layer by layer, that by far is the hardest to get back. And I think that just ties right into this analogy and comparison to our own personal healing is that that first layer is the hardest to peel back, like the one where you become aware that your childhood was great. There was love in your home, but there was also things that happened that hurt you. And because you weren't aware of them for so long, now they've grown and the cycle is repeated and all of the things. So if you can like get that stinking hard papery layer to come off.
Yeah. And that's what I love about our current provider is she legit pushes you in ways that I think my other therapist didn't. And it's a very loving, yet, like I said, accountable, because there were sessions where I would spin in the same cycles over and over again, right? Like we had been meeting at least monthly, if not more than that, for multiple months now. And she just looks at me and she's like, how long are we going to do this? You let me know. I'm on board, but how long are we going to do it? So I'm like, okay, yeah, we're going to try to make different decisions. But it wasn't until I needed that kind of pushing, if you will.
Support. I think it's
Somebody,
just support.
yeah, to legit rip that first layer of like, oh yeah, this is why this keeps happening. Once I got that layer, then it was like, oh yeah, now I could handle all of the after sessions from that much easier. And we jumped to the awareness much quicker.
Yeah. But
that first one was like, oh.
It's also like, I guess I don't know if I've ever tried this with a real onion before, but I'd imagine that you could, if you didn't keep working at it, you could get the next layer to dry out and be just as hard. Like you can put on that protection.
Yeah. And that first one is like so flaky, right? So you could like pull a little piece and all you get is a little part of the dried rather than like the other ones. Once you get like it going, the whole section comes. It's hard to like break the section. So yeah.
Or sometimes there's multiple of the first like there's multiple layers that have dried together and they're really hard and you try peeling them with your fingernail and then you get a cut under your fingernail and it hurts really bad and you don't want to keep trying.
Yes.
Man, I should just keep going with this onion thing.
Yes.
But I hope that it is relatable because
I think it is. I'm proud of us. Having gone through it, I'm so proud of us.
Okay, so we've talked boundaries and divorce and communication and healing and onions. Is there anything else that you would like to talk about before we wrap up?
I think what I would love for people to know is while we mentioned like all of this is hard work and you have to address the pain to like heal from it, I can't even begin to describe how all of these changes, like I feel like I'm finally coming back home. That's maybe the best way to explain it is like for years, it wasn't just like a couple years that this is where like I had lost myself, but it had been years that now I'm like finally coming back into me and where the joy had been gone for so long. The joy is coming back. And there are so many more greater things that we can experience if we just open our mind up to the idea that that's actually possible. Because that is where I ultimately was stuck for so long, was that, is it actually better in a different situation? Could it feel different for me? Again, going back to my personality, I can get stuck in the fantasizing of things. And so it was like, wait, but do other people actually experience something different in their marriage or whatever it may be? This could relate to business as well. This could be something else. But that whole idea of like, I was capping the potential of what it could be because I was scared. And now that I've done that work, and freed myself again of that like emotional roller coaster and letting those emotions like control the day to day, life is totally different than it was even just 4 months ago.
Mm-hmm. The miracle is not the miracle.
The miracle is not the miracle. And that was, in going into the programs that I did, the miracle I was searching was to heal my marriage. And that is not the miracle that I actually received, but the miracle that was so much better than what I had put on myself. So, I think that's just the message of like, this is hard, but yet there's so much good that comes from going through it. And it's such we were talking about cycles and repeating. By us doing the work, it makes it that much easier for our kids or those around us to do the work. Like there are those kinds of compounding benefits of us doing it.
So much agree with that. I think we'll wrap it up. But before we go, can you tell everyone where they can find you?
So I spend most of my time on Instagram or LinkedIn at sheila.hansen.cpa. I also have a podcast called Profitable Women, which is geared towards female business owners and talking about finances and having time and energy left over. And so not focusing on so much revenue goals, but that bottom line that actually matters.
I mean, your podcast is geared towards women, but you do have some male listeners, I think.
I do, yeah.
So it's good for everyone.
It's good for everyone. And Taryn was on episode 11. Taryn was on episode 11 of the podcast. So if nothing else, you can go listen to our banter together on that podcast.
If you want more of us, that's where you can find us together.
Yes.
Well, with that, thank you so much for coming on. I'm excited for this episode and how it will help those who listen. And until next time, listeners, draw good movement. Thanks so much for tuning in. I'm so grateful for you. If you found value in this episode, I'd love for you to share with others who might also benefit from tuning in. Share by word of mouth, send it in a text, take a screenshot and post it on social media, or share however you prefer. And if you haven't already, hit the follow or subscribe button so you never miss an episode. Until next time, draw good movement.